you have 3 books on Amazon? 3 or
We
2?
have 3 books, exactly.
3
3 books on ERP and CRM solutions that are available on Amazon, and it went on to become Amazon bestsellers.
That's great. That's terrific. So I was going to introduce you as the ERP masters of the universe. Is that too hyperbolic?
That's pretty out there. That might be putting it a little far out on the edge.
Yeah.
But certainly, 20 plus years of experience in ERP and business applications in general. And the beauty of the books, some people have asked us, what's with the books? The beauty of the books is that they're not specific to one particular application or another. They were really written for an audience that is either looking for or in need of a new ERP solution. Either they have outgrown a basic accounting system like a QuickBooks or something like that, or they have run into some challenge with their existing ERP solution that might be necessitating a move to a new platform as well.
Right. So how do
might
you
be
know,
running.
How does a customer know that, or a company know, business owner know that they're ready for the next step?
That's a great question, and that's exactly what we talk about in the books. Is we go through those kinds of scenarios where, for example, maybe the proliferation of Excel spreadsheets has gotten to a point where an awful lot of your management of your financial data is being done outside a core system. Or the system's performance just is not sufficient. One of the things that we see, for example, with QuickBooks is a lot of people get started with QuickBooks. It's a great platform for getting your business off the ground. But at some point, it gets to a point where you've got so many transactions in there, and it's really not designed for thousands and thousands of transactions. And the database, the underlying database itself starts to bog down. It can get corrupted. You'll start having system performance problems. It'll crash. You'll potentially lose data. I've seen clients in the past where they were trying to back up and restore the thing multiple times a day just to keep it alive. And that's a perfect example of, okay, you're beyond having outgrown it at this point in time, and you need something that's more sophisticated. Another thing that happens is that they might be outgrowing it in the sense that their business has outgrown it, where they're looking at doing acquisitions and or some element in their business has changed, or the regulatory environment has changed. So, for example, I was just having this conversation with a controller at a company last week, and they're a perfect example where they're looking at having to upgrade to something that's more sophisticated. QuickBooks is not in and of itself. It's not compliant with generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP accounting. There are things that you can do in QuickBooks which make it super easy to use. For example, like I can go in and I can delete a transaction. Well, that makes it easy to use, but anybody who's a controller, an accountant by trade, will just absolutely go nuts with the thought of deleting a transaction.
Right. How long, Eric, before you think it starts to pay for itself, the ERP system? I imagine that if it's old, that they're spending lots of time, like you said, trying to back it up every day or, every 5 minutes or whatever they have to do. And then, considering the real cost of upgrading. So about how long, or does it depend?
It really depends. And this is what we look at when we go in and we talk to companies. So by way of example, here's a great example where, you could have a very quick ROI because, again, we go back to that conversation of what's being done outside the system. So here's a great example. A couple of years ago, I was working with a pharmaceutical company, and they were considering a new ERP solution. And this was not a small company. They had multiple divisions. And we were in talks with the controller and the CFO of the company. And the CFO thought that, everything in their accounting was pretty straightforward. And she was under the impression that everything was pretty good. And we were trying to find out, what's the value justification for moving to the new ERP solution. So I was talking to the controller and trying to understand some of the specific challenges that she had around, the current system that they were using. And in the pharmaceutical business, there are what the industry called trade promotions, but basically scenarios where the products, have to get sold in a certain period of time. They take the products back. They also have the scenario where, there are, expiration dates, and they may have to take product back. And so the net of all of that was, as we were talking to the controller, we were trying to understand how much time she spends dealing with all of that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so I simply asked, I said, how much time does it take you to, they were doing all of that, managing all of that in Excel spreadsheets. And I said, well, okay, how long does that actually take you today? And she said, 4 hours. And I said, 4 hours a month? And she said, no, 4 hours a day.
Wow.
So 50% of the controller's time, and in a corporate environment, a controller is not an inexpensive resource. You're probably paying them, depending upon where in the country they are, but you're probably paying somewhere, approaching, if not over, 6 figures.
Mm-hmm.
So 50% of one of your expensive resources like that, 50% of that person's time is being spent managing this one element of the accounting for the business. That's a perfect scenario where, okay, can we automate that in the system? Yep. Okay. We just gave you 50% of one person's time back. And that's a perfect scenario. Those are the kinds of things that we look for when we're trying to determine if a client, needs a new ERP solution. It really comes down to questions like that. Where's the business value in doing this?
So Eric, tell me about your ERP health check, because I'm looking at your website, ssgnet.com, and you have download our ERP health checklist. Does that include some of the more thoughtful questions that you want business owners to think about? Is this a self-assessment, or is this something that you do for them?
Exactly. Yeah, this is a self-assessment, and it's a way for them to start the process of thinking about this. So the core of the ERP health check is pretty straightforward in the sense that when you have a system like this, just like any other piece of technology, to be really honest about it, but certainly if we go back to that heart and brain analogy of a moment ago, you want to make sure that you're taking care of it. You want to maintain it. We go to the gym, we go to the doctor, we take care of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Or another analogy might be, we take care of our cars. You get your 30,000 mile checkups, you get your oil changed, all of those things. There's a maintenance element to owning these technologies. And unfortunately, one of the challenges that we see in the market is that a lot of people, they spend a bunch of money, they implement one of these solutions, it gets implemented, they go through that process, and then it just kind of runs. Well, that's kind of the good news and the bad news, right? Because it's out there, it's running, it's doing what we wanted it to do, but we're not maintaining it in a lot of cases. IT doesn't really know how to maintain it in a lot of cases because it sort of sits in a weird space where it's not really an IT solution.
Mm-hmm.
It's really a financial solution. And so the accounting side of the house tends to get tasked with it, but they don't really know how to manage it. And there are underlying things that need to be done. If you're running a system, in-house, on a server, on premise, in the office somewhere, depending upon what the database platform is, and the most common one is going to be Microsoft SQL. Are they making sure that they're checking the audit logs? And there's a lot of sort of backup that needs to happen, but also, like I said, just maintenance of the system. And if you don't do it, which unfortunately is what we see, then what happens is you start to get system degradation. And what
Hmm.
I mean by that is the performance of the system will not be what it was when it was originally implemented. Users will frequently describe this as simply, it's slow. you know,
Right.
they'll
Right.
describe it as saying it's slow. And the reason that it's slowed down is usually there are a couple of different things, but either the database itself has grown so large that it's consumed a lot of the server space.
Hmm.
That can be part of the problem. So maybe we need to archive some of the older data. That can certainly be done, but again, that's something that frequently isn't being done. There may be some kind of error messages. There may be something that's going on behind the scenes that's just not right. And there may be some error messages and error logs that are being created, but nobody's looking at them and nobody's maintaining it. So again, you're seeing there's an underlying issue somewhere in there, but nobody's checking to figure out what the problem is. So these are all kind of things that can happen. Another area that we'll see is, from a reporting standpoint, but maybe, it takes a really long time for reports to run. Again, that's an indication of frequently some kind of a memory issue of some kind.
Hmm.
Um, so all of these things are indicative of some element of maintenance. And it's just like if you have your car, if you put your foot on the gas and it doesn't, immediately respond the way that it used to, you realize, okay, something's not right here. I probably, maybe the check engine light isn't on, but I probably need to get it checked out.
Right. Oh, I think one of the more immediate issues is what you were talking about earlier with that other client on how much time they were spending nursing this old system.
Sure.
So I
And
think
that's
that's
another
a great
side to
thing.
it.
Hmm.
Yeah, no, that you're absolutely right. That's another side to it. It all comes down to, again, if you want to think about it from a car standpoint,
Yep.
you get to a point when you've owned a car for a long time where, you start to look at how much money am I putting into it from a maintenance
Yeah.
standpoint,
Mhm.
and or how much downtime does it have versus do I just go get a new one?
Yeah.
Compliance is a big thing for you guys,
Yes, it is.
and compliance is also something that we look at, in the ERP world as well, with things like, California Consumer Privacy Act
Yes.
and HIPAA. All of these form, part of that regulatory environment that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
And your core ERP system is certainly part of that as well. So I think that, for any folks who are, catching today's video,
Hmm.
if you have concerns at all about compliance, would love to engage with any of those. And I know, Krista, you'd probably love to have that conversation with
I
them.
would love to have that conversation. Well, thank you very much. Yeah. We would love to have that conversation, especially CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act, is on everyone's mind. And more companies fall under it than not. There are some companies,
Sure.
they don't think they do. But anyways, this is about ERP. We want people to go and visit you at ssgnet.com.
That's
Correct?
this. Correct.
Okay.
ssgnet.com.
And they can download their health check
They
there,
can.
and they can go to Amazon and they can look for Eric Klauss and Brian Enuma. Yeah.
That's correct. Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
And
And
then
maybe what we can do is put links for all of those in with the video as well.
absolutely. And then they can also look for you on your podcast. So there's lots of places where you can find Eric.
You can. You can
I
also
think you
find me on
might be. See,
LinkedIn.
I think that master of the universe thing, it may kind of apply.
Well, it would love to have those conversations with anyone. If you have any questions around business applications, ERP and CRM, we'd love to have that discussion with you. Happy to share some of the best practices that we've learned over 20 years in this business, and help our clients.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Krista.